idea for today's class is to organize some of the concepts that have already been introduced, and also I will be talking about autobiographical memory and learning, which are today's topic. I was saying that we will first have to consider our main topic, that is of course memory, and I said that we can study memory from different perspectives, like for example cognitive, social, and affective perspective. But these are just ways of organizing the information. The brain and the mind is complex and cannot be explained or studied as separate components, because actually some of the concepts that we see from the cognitive perspective are related to some other concepts that we are going to study in the social perspective. That's why analyzing the relationship is always very helpful. Now, first, let's review some different kinds of memory. These are the first concepts that were introduced in this course. And, well, let's review a little bit. The study of memory began with Ebbinghaus, who was the first actually to demonstrate that memory can be studied experimentally. But then in the 1950s, the cognitive psychology approaches distinguished encoding or input into memory. And that's proposed a classification that considers three types of memory. So initially, we classified memory systems into sensory memory, short-term memory, and long-term memory. Now, later different modal models that followed, some of the, different modal models were followed to study memory. Some of them included sensory memory as a subcomponent of short-term memory, others as a perceptual rather than a mnemonic process. But the problem with these modal models is that they couldn't explain the interaction between short-term memory and long-term memory. Thus, Baddeley, the author of your textbook, proposed a multi-component that he called working memory, which is very useful because it helps us to distinguish short-term memory from working memory. Short-term memory referring just to simple retention of small amounts of information, and working memory as a system that temporarily holds information, but with the intention of performing a more complex task. Now, the problem with this multimodal model is that it couldn't account for the relationship between working memory and other executive functions, or it couldn't account for the relationship between working memory and the individual differences in attention that some studies were finding. Now, you may be wondering why executive functions are important for the study of memory or for the study of working memory. Now, executive functions is a psychological term that we use to refer to some skills or abilities that are carried out by the prefrontal cortex. And this is why executive function is important to the study of memory, because, well, there are some neuroimaging studies that have shown that an interplay between subcortical regions like the hippocampus and other cortical regions like, for example, the prefrontal cortex, the interplay between these two regions is crucial for memory consolidation. Now, and this is why executive functions is important to the study of memory. I mean, you cannot think of a memory model that does not account other executive functions, because they are all carried out by the prefrontal cortex. And we know that this, in the interaction of the prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus, is important for memory consolidation. Now, I'm referring here to system consolidation. If you have read the chapter 5 for today's class, you may have read that there are different types of consolidation. System consolidation refers more to a process operating at the level of brain systems, which is different from synaptic consolidation. Synaptic consolidation is related to synaptic plasticity. We have already studied long-term potentiation and how that is a process or a mechanism of synaptic consolidation. But you may be wondering, okay, what's the relationship between this? Or how is it that long-term potentiation is related to system consolidation? And that's what we're going to see today. Now, this other mechanism of consolidation, synaptic consolidation, happens at the neuronal level. And it refers to structural remodeling of neurons. Now, these structural changes at the neuronal level can happen due to different processes, like the one that I just said, long-term potentiation, in which, I mean, in long-term potentiation, the importance of this mechanism is that, for example, it can increase the size of electrical potentials created in the receiving neuron. Now, this mechanism of long-term potentiation is considered the basis of learning, and the discovery of this mechanism could prove Hebb's theory of learning, which is a type of explicit learning. And let's analyze this, because this will help us to understand why long-term potentiation is also related to system consolidation, or the relationship between subcortical and cortical regions. Okay, so Hebb's proposed, Hebb's was a Canadian psychologist, very important for the study of human memory. And he proposed that long-term learning is based on cell assemblies. So the idea is that when two separate neurons are repeatedly excited in synchrony, the chemistry of the synapse, or yeah, when I say synapse or the synaptic cleft, then I mean I'm referring to this gap here. So the chemistry of this gap here between the neuron changes, and this is often summarized as the popular phrase that probably you have heard before: neurons that fire together wire together. This is where the phrase comes from. It was referring to this idea of how a long-term potentiation can happen because of the structural changes at the neuronal level. Now, Hebb's believed that short-term learning was reflected in temporary electrical changes within existing cell assemblies, while long-term learning is based on the development of further synaptic connections. So, synaptic consolidation or cellular consolidation is that happens at the neuronal level is thought to result in system-level consolidation, where the memories are transferred from the hippocampus to the neocortex. So this is the relationship. I mean, the idea is that learning will happen first at the neuronal level through the mechanism of long-term potentiation, which is one of the mechanisms. Now there are some more current theories that are describing something that is called intrinsic plasticity, that happens it's not the relationship with other neurons, but it happens, it's the type of plasticity that happens in the same neuron. So it doesn't consider the relationship with other neurons like synaptic plasticity, but it's a plasticity within the same neurons. But those are current theories, and they are just being studied. I mean, they are very recent, and there is not much experimental evidence about them. So as I was saying, this learning that may happen at the neuronal level through processes of, for example, long-term potentiation, then result in a system consolidation, forming memories that are transcribed or transferred from the hippocampus to the prefrontal cortex. So this is how the different type of system consolidations are related. Now, this type of learning is more explicit in the sense that it involves conscious recall, or involves awareness and a conscious process. But there is another type of learning, or a different type of learning, that is called implicit learning, in which the evidence of learning comes from a change in behavior. This is learning demonstrated by performance rather than conscious recall. And we can recognize three types of implicit learning. classical conditioning, which comes actually from Pavlov's observation of the salivatory reflex of a dog. You may have already studied that, but in general, the importance of Pavlov's experiment is that it allows us to associate stimulus in the world and our own bodily responses based on the experience. So it relates learning with the world and with the environment and experience. Now, classical conditioning can explain, for example, why we fear certain things. There are many actually neuroimaging studies that have shown, for example, the importance of the amygdala in human conditioning. Another type of learning, of implicit learning, is priming, which happens when when presenting a stimulus enhances its subsequent processing without our awareness. That is, most studies have focused on perceptual priming, which involves a stimulus that have similar forms. Most of these studies do some experiments with words, because an example would be of a perceptual priming. For example, the word goat will evoke a faster response when it is preceded by the word boat, because the two words are perceptually similar. Now, some other studies, like this one that we have here, which was an fMRI study, have analyzed these effects at a deeper level, at a more deeper level, or at a conceptual level, which is actually what we call, or what we know as conceptual priming. This is actually a study, an example of conceptual priming. You have the study in your textbook, so please read it. These are just examples. But the idea is that you can study different, there are different types of priming. Perceptual priming that is more concerned with the similarity of forms. And at a deeper level, conceptual priming, which is, it includes a more deeper, an analysis at a deeper level. Now, finally, procedural learning refers to the acquisition of motor skills and habits. Now, habit learning refers to gradually learning a tendency to perform certain actions, given a particular context, and based on a history of reward. An example of habit learning is instrumental conditioning. And an example of instrumental conditioning is, for example, when you train a dog how to shake hands. This is habit learning. Now, skill learning, on the other hand, can be subdivided actually into motor skill learning and cognitive skill learning. Motor skill learning refers to the learning of physical skills, like, for example, learning how to ride a bike. And cognitive skill learning refers more to mental activities, such as, for example, reading or study. So these are in general the different type of implicit learnings that, remember, the difference is that this is more demonstrated by performance, while explicit learning involves a conscious process or a conscious recall process. There are other type of explicit learners that we're going to analyze later in other lectures, like, for example, some that are related to episodic memories, but that we're not going to see that today. The idea today is just to introduce the difference between them. We have analyzed how learning is also associated to the environment. Like, for example, conditioning learning is associated to the environment and to our experience, is based on our experience. The idea is that we also learn from the behavior of others, or we also form social bonds that help us create a coherent self-image. So now we're going to analyze the relationship between learning, considering more the social perspective, because so far we have focused on how learning happens, for example, at the neuronal level, and how that helps or yields synaptic consolidation, and how synaptic consolidation can result in system consolidation. and the different type of memories that we can classify, or different type of classification of memories that we can consider. But also learning has a very important social component. Now, and memory actually has a very social, is very much related to social components. The memories, for example, that we hold regarding ourselves and our relationship with the world is what we call autobiographical memories. Now, this type of memory is difficult to study because the experimenter lacks control over the learning situation. That is to say, we cannot easily judge people's accuracy. But well, the most traditionally used methods are diary studies, in which involves just asking people to record events in a diary as they occur, and the proof method, in which autobiographical memory is evolved by either presenting a keyword, or by asking memories from a specific life period. Now, most theories of autobiographical memory are in their infancy, but well, the most traditional one is, or the most common one, or popular one, is that of Conway's. And Conway proposed the theory of autobiographical memory as a system that retains knowledge concerning the experienced self, consistent of memories that are always addressed by the content of the memory, and which are transitory and dynamically constructed on the basis of the autobiographical knowledge base and the interaction with the working self. Now, autobiographical knowledge base, well, it's actually a hierarchy containing different life periods. Well, we can see here, this is just a graph. But the idea is that it's a hierarchy that it contains different life periods or time events. Now, the working self, well, this is sometimes compared to working memory because it involves a more dynamic process. It involves a complex set of goals, for example, and goals and self-images through information that is filtered and encoded. So it comprises conceptual self-knowledge, personal details, like, for example, occupation, family background, professional aims. Now, this working self is partly constructed by family background, peers, education, myth, and stereotypes. And well, the effective working self should be coherent, grounded in reality, and when it is divorced from reality, the working self can produce confabulations and delusions, according to Cohen's theory, right? Remember, this is just one of the theories, one of the most common theories, but this is the idea. Let's see if I can go back. Yeah, okay. So remember that we can study memory from cognitive, social, and affective perspective. From the cognitive perspective, we have studied the different classifications of memory and the problems that we can have or that we can study in the different type of models. Remember that we have modal models that just consider or that the problem is that they didn't consider a relationship between short-term memory and long-term memory. And then we have multi-component models like the model of parallel of working memory. Now, remember that we said that for memory consolidation can happen at the, this is better. Memory consolidation can happen at the synaptic or the neuronal level, and at the more or system consolidation can happen at the brain system level. Now, synaptic consolidation, an important mechanism of synaptic consolidation and of learning is long-term potentiation that happens at the neuronal level, but we have already seen how actually this is a Hebb's theory, how long-term potentiation is the basis of learning and plasticity. It's the basis of learning and memory, through the process of synaptic plasticity. But this long-term potentiation, something that happens at the neuronal level, and this process that happens at the neuronal level can result in system consolidation at the brain level. System consolidation, remember that the way that we consolidate information is with the interplay of subcortical regions like the hippocampus and cortical regions like the prefrontal cortex. Now, Hebbian learning, the one that considers synaptic consolidation, is a kind of explicit learning because it involves awareness or conscious recall. But then I also introduced some other concepts that are more, or some other type of learnings that are implicit learning, like, for example, conditioning, priming, and procedural learning. These different type of learnings allow us to start to understand the relationship between learning and the more social component, because it involves the relationship, or it explains how learning is associated with the environment or with the experience. And then I also introduced the concept of autobiographical memories, which are just, autobiographical memories is just the memories we hold regarding ourselves and our relationship with the world. We said that there are different methods to study autobiographical memory, but they have some problems because it's very difficult to, it's very difficult to judge people's accuracy. But the two most common methods are diary studies and probing. And I have also said that I have presented Cowan's theory of memory that, remember, that considers the two components of autobiographical knowledge base, which is just a hierarchy, consistent life episodes, and the working self, which for some authors is related to working memory, because this is more a dynamic process that involves a complex set of active goals and self-images. Now, I was beginning to explain there are different factors that affect the way we remember things. But a very important factor, or a very important one, is that of emotion. Because our feelings shape our memories too. An example is, for example, something that is called flashbulb memories. An example of a flashbulb memory is, let's think, okay, so you probably remember what you were doing the day that you were told that we had to self-isolate and the university was going to remain closed the whole year. You probably remember what you were doing, who you were with. That's an example of flashbulb experience. It's actually, it's a term that we use to explain detailed and vivid memory of a dramatic experience or of an experience that was very moving to you. Now, over time, the emotion created by memories in normal people shows a phenomenon known as fading effect bias, in which the affective intensity of positive memories diminishes far less rapidly than the affective intensity of negative memories. However, extreme distress may trigger amnesia, for example, in the case of psychogenic amnesia. And sometimes the opposite can actually happen. I mean, hyperaccessibility of a distressing autobiographical memory can result in post-traumatic stress disorder. That's another example. So we can see how these autobiographical memories, for example, are very much related to more affective components. Post-traumatic stress disorder actually is a condition induced by trauma that results in persistent flashbacks of the autobiographical memory. Now, there are many different factors that contribute to post-traumatic stress disorder, such as a deficit in memory control, And well, there are also some neuroimaging studies that have shown or have found a correlation between the size of the hippocampus and post-traumatic stress disorder. That is, patients with post-traumatic stress disorder generally show smaller hippocampal volume. Okay, let me just see here. Autobiographical memory rely jointly on executive functions of the prefrontal cortex, the visualization areas of the occipital and parietal lobes, and well, then the memory areas of the temporal lobe and emotional processing in the amygdala. Now, autobiographical retrieval relies more on, yes, on the emotional processes of the amygdala, hippocampal, and the right inferior frontal gyrus activity. And semantic retrieval relies more on prolonged left frontal activation. So we see that here that we have different type of activations. This is important because a critical debate in the literature is a distinction between autobiographical memories and episodic memory or semantic memory, for example. And because, well, they are clearly related, but they are also very different in several ways.